Hey, welcome back to my channel. It's been a while, but I've been busy. I mean, I love my game dev, but you know, it's just a hobby after all. After finishing my last video, I set out to do something which turned out to be a lot more complex than I had anticipated. It's like everything else in game dev, isn't it? You get to 90% relatively easily, and then the remaining 10% takes ages. I made a water level and learned some lessons along the way, which I will share with you today. But before I do, let me just say, y'all been watching my videos without subscribing, which is fine, but I would still accept your subscription as a goodwill token. You see, I'm trying to get to 10k subscribers, and your help is instrumental. So if you could hit the subscribe button right now, I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Right, back to the video. So in this map, you are half immersed in murky water, and apparently the area had been flooded or something. And so you'll be able to find interesting stuff floating around, not to mention that you may run into a different type of enemy. I mean, I can imagine a water demon that suddenly rises from under the surface, or you could have demons riding boats and so on. I actually made one such enemy already, a demon on a jet ski, which I'll show you in a second, so continue watching. Okay, so what do you need to do to make a scene like this look convincing? Well, firstly, the water needs to look like water. I started with the world's simplest water shader, which slowly animates the normal map texture to create the waves. I really wanted to have these reflections because I think they add a ton of realism to the scene, so I had to make a trade-off. I had to sacrifice proximity fade. You see, for proximity fade to work, your shader needs to have alpha enabled, but if you enable alpha, your surface ceases to be reflective, even if you dial roughness down to 0. You just can't have a reflective surface with alpha, at least as far as I know. You can't, and I'm happy to be corrected. It looks cool with proximity fade and everything, but I liked the reflectivity better, especially that, you know, in this scene I don't really care what's under the surface. In fact, it's even more disturbing when the water is so murky that you can't see into it. The next thing to make water look good is some form of fluid simulation, especially when you have a third-person character right in front of the camera and moving in water. Fluid simulation usually involves a vertex displacement, and in order to look convincing, you need a pretty tight mesh, and that obviously comes at a cost to performance. So I needed something way cheaper that could still look okay. So I created a simple setup where there is a plane that follows the player, and it has a material on it with low roughness and high specularity, and it has a viewport texture in the normal slot, and that's what's creating this illusion of an uneven fluid surface. The viewport is linked to a camera that is looking at a particle emitter that emits these noisy particles. When the player is stationary, only the larger particles will emit, and when you start to move, the smaller particles join in. The emitter itself follows the position of the player on the map, which creates this effect of a trail of reflections that you leave behind as you move. I thought the effect was good enough with just the normal map. You can easily add vertex displacement to it if you wanted to. You can just use the viewport texture as a height map, for example. I just didn't think it was worth the price. I also added water splashes. I used 3D particles for this. They emit or stop emitting based on my velocity. It looks like there's lots of them, but actually the amounts are very small. I'm using animated particles, so each particle is a small splash animation. In Godot 4 you can use a sprite sheet for animated particles, and that's what I did. I made the splash animation in After Effects and then combined the frames into a sprite sheet in Photoshop. I also added a splash that emits when I land into the water from a jump, for example, like so. You can probably also hear the sound effects. I added some of those to make the movement more convincing, and I think it rounds off the effect quite well. I had problems with occlusion with GI. SDF GI is what creates these, in my opinion, nice looking reflections in the water. But the problem is SDF GI doesn't support dynamic occlusion. It supports dynamic lights, okay, but it doesn't support dynamic occluders. So if you have a dynamic object, it will bake its reflection into the water, basically. So these rocks are all static and their reflections are static. But if I grab one and move it, you can see its reflection is not moving along with it. And now if it goes off screen and then back in, you'll see it has created a new reflection for itself in its current position, but the old one is still there. The way around this problem is you have to disable global illumination for this mesh in its properties. So right here, I'll set this to disable. Now, of course, this means that the mesh will no longer be affected by GI, meaning that it will lose some of its visual appeal, but that is just another trade-off. So I disabled global illumination for the moving objects only, of course, and when they stop moving, I switch it back on. Like after I've just killed an enemy and approached them to inspect if there's something I could loot, the reflections should look the part by then. Speaking of enemies, I made this enemy that is a demon with a gun in his mouth, riding a scrap heap jet ski with a gun turret mounted at the rear. I used a Mixamo skeleton for which I created a new mesh and a sitting animation. This guy took way too long to build. There's just so many conditions to satisfy, like for example, the turret has to have angular limits, so it doesn't shoot the driver in the back. So it has to know on which side of it I am. If it's facing forward on the left of the boat, for instance, and I'm also in front of the boat but on the right side of it, it needs to rotate all the way around the back of the boat to aim at me on the other side. It sounds easy, but it's kind of tricky to get right in code. I made this guy to be modular, so I can differentiate the level of difficulty. The turret is optional, or you could have multiple turrets, and also I can easily swap head guns or not give him a head gun at all, for example. I also added a trailer which will carry a loot box or something like that. It's a rundown plastic water tank. As you can see, I just needed something that would, float in water and have enough buoyancy, I guess, to hold a load. Initially, I experimented with the various joints to attach the trailer to the boat. The best results I think I got with the hinge joint, but unfortunately, there's no way to damp the rotation. So the boat was flapping the trailer from side to side like it had no weight or friction. The 6 DOF joint does support damping, but still the trailer went haywire on bends. The rotations were correct, but it just didn't look right, so I built my own hinge, so to speak. It's very simple. There's a hook node at the back, which is simply a 3D node, and the trailer smoothly interpolates its transform towards that hook. And I'm also checking the angle between the boat and its direction vector and smoothly rotating the trailer by that angle, and that way the trailer naturally swings to the sides as the boat turns. I also added IK solvers to his wrists in Godot so that his hands remain, fixed on the handlebars even when the rest of the skeleton is animating. Now, when I kill this guy, the boat grinds to a halt and starts to slowly sink to the bottom, and the trailer gets detached. And now, with the driver being dead, there's no one to operate the turret, so I can safely climb onto the trailer and loot the box. So I have 2 types of map now, one dry, one wet, and I want to add a third one, which will be airborne. It will be based on floating platforms. I haven't done it yet, but I've done some pre-work by adding a recoil mechanic to my shooting. This one is inspired by shooter platformers, where sometimes you can use your gun's recoil to propel yourself upward and reach a platform that would normally be too high for you to jump onto. So here you can see an example of that. This rock here is too high for me to jump onto, but if I jump and shoot downwards, the recoil will boost me up a bit. It also throws me backwards a little bit, as I imagine it would in real life, so I may have to do it while reversing. Okay, here we go. That's how it works. One other thing I did was add an underwater view, if you will, because when I look up, the camera is actually underwater. So I added a plane in front of the camera, which slides up from the bottom of the screen based on the camera's vertical rotation. And it has a simple vertex shader that makes it wave, and a fragment shader for refraction, so underwater things look refracted, and I think it looks quite okay. Now, going back to the to dry land for a second. Under my last video, someone suggested that I add destructible legs to the spider boss, and I loved the idea, so I did just that. So now you can shoot the legs off, and the spider kind of crawls towards you, which looks even creepier than when all legs are in place. Last but not least, I added player death. When I run out of HP, the screen goes red and I fall to the ground while a post-mortem camera surveys my corpse. this is where I'm at with this project at the moment. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like it if you did, and do consider subscribing, please. If I ever get to 10k subscribers, I will release a playable demo of this and make it into an actual commercial project. That's my current thinking. Anyway, if you like what you saw, share some love in the comments, follow me on Twitter for more regular updates, and stay tuned for more. I will see you in the next video. Ciao.